IPS Deep Think Tank. Okay, we are recording. It is 10/12/2024, Saturday, and this is episode 2 of the IPS Deep Think Tank. We talk about anything, everything, and then promote this to the regular channels as a podcast. And this will bring in, hopefully, more people, more ideas, and anything we gloss over, perhaps we can go into more detail. So thanks everyone for joining, and it's pretty much open floor. We've been talking about a lot of things. I think we firmly established the correlation between the fictional universe of Gotham, Batman, Joker, and everything going on with the Trump campaign. Like, that is beyond dispute. We're way past being mystified and blown away by it, as synchromystics seem to be. We have figured out this is part of the entrainment process for future fake news that becomes fake history, because the conquerors who conquered us write our history. I think we've made a lot of progress in the last few months, largely in part thanks to the rapid succession of psyops that continually validate our model. So I think we're doing very well as a think tank, and I think it's important that we continue to gather as a think tank like we used to in Discord. So that's why I decided to start this new podcast series. And I think that it'll also attract more people who hear it on the replay.
So with the Trump thing, do you think that they're just putting it in our face that the whole presidential thing is just a comic strip?
That is interesting. I would say, I think the reason why they hit that is that they want to reach the most number of people. So adults watch Man in Full with Charlie Coker, they see Trump. The Batman targets the youth. I think it targets a wider audience. So I think it's just part of the fact that they need the messaging to be ubiquitous. It needs to be in everything. And that's and the Joker Batman thing, I think it has some strong political significance with the Joker versus Batman dialectic that correlates with left versus right, Antifa versus Proud Boy. So I think the Batman universe is being exploited by the propagandists. But you make a good point here, because Trump does bring things down to the level of World Wrestling Entertainment and comics. Like, it really does trivialize it.
Yeah, that yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I was speaking to because he does. He's a comedian within himself. I mean, all of his speeches and that kind of thing. So it just makes you it's almost like he takes on the Joker role. And he knows it. He knows he's taken on that role. It's weird.
Have you seen Joker Part 2?
No, but I've heard people talk about it. But
Okay, because this is interesting, because I was looking at, for the most part, Batman is associated with Trump. However, in this Joker 2, it's about him in the Joker role, and they're trying to convict him of being, this mastermind, this criminal killer. But his argument is that he's not the Joker. It was just a role, or it's a split personality. But the whole thing was about roles, and that's the exact courthouse where Trump was. So there is kind of a Trump Joker overlap here, and I think you nailed it there. And it's certainly the case that they want to drag this halfway into fiction. It's more malleable, I think.
well, I also think there's an aspect to it that Trump is Batman and the Joker because it's like shadow characters of of who Trump really is, which nobody knows, right? Because he doesn't portray that to the world. I mean, we have no idea who he really is. So, yeah.
Well, in the Cape Crusader series on Amazon, the last episode, Batman throws the boomerang at Rupert Thorne and cuts his ear as a warning. I'll be back at season 2. Season 2 is picked up by Amazon on August 4th, which is a hugely significant date. But the other part of it is that the character's name, Rupert Thorne, seems to tie into Damien Thorne, who's another Trump character. So yeah, Trump is represented in many different ways, whether it's like a real estate magnate, a politician, a xenophobic, or a kind of a demagogue, a bad mafia don. So he has all these aspects. A con man, that's a big one. And in that 1958 show Trackdown, the con man named Trump ends up getting arrested at the end. And people noticed that was Trump predictive programming in 2015, 2016, way before he got arrested. So having rewatched it, I'm like, that was even more prescient than it was 8 years ago, which is kind of fascinating to watch how it unfolds.
Yeah, in the Batman role, because Trump's out there saying right now that if he gets elected, he's going to um, fix the immigrant problem, right? So that's a Batman. That's a Batman character aspect. Save the world.
In QAnon lore, he's a savior and he's a hero, but he has a different aspect to the other side. So you're kind of right about that. How they're basically it's like if you're on one side you see one person, on the other side you see another. Same with Bill Gates and Elon Musk. A lot of these billionaires have these two aspects depending on where you are. Savior destroyers. Musk is a destroyer.
Yeah.
He's also our
Yep.
savior.
Yep.
But savior destroyers, how does that even happen?
I think they're just the archetypal um, personification because archetypes usually have both sides per se, a good and evil side.
And we have to recall, I mean, this is fundamentally literature. We're looking at history in the making. It's a story. So these characters have depth, and that would make sense. Many, many layers. Trump has the Christ archetypes, the Christ typology attached to him, in addition to everything else. And I'm like, wait, how is this guy so much antichrist? But at the same time, he's being compared with Christ. How can he be both? So there's definitely a heavy element here too. The superimposition of archetypes and characters in order to like enrich that character and amplify their messaging. So Trump is definitely a composite,
Right.
just as much as Musk is.
Yeah, and the evil side was warp speed in 2020, right? Because he, I mean, look what that turned into. I mean, and all the propaganda from the right, which is who's supporting Trump right now, but yet they're against, they're so anti-vax. It's crazy how they set that up.
Only right wingers and conspiracy theorists see that as evil. Everyone else sees that as good. It's kind of important to keep, in mind that like yeah, half the country is in favor of all the worst stuff at any given moment. It's ridiculous. So you think that like we can all agree that this is bad, right? And the other half's like, no, and you should go to jail for not agreeing with me. It's insane. It's because the population is comprised of programmers who are just programmed to be programmers. And as I think David Icke said, we are our own prison wardens. And that's certainly true. I'm waiting for the helmet Karens. Where's your helmet? Space junk is real. We could start that as a movement. We just walk around with the helmet on and even just I don't know, maybe you have like some writing on the side of it, like ask me about space junk. Because if you're not wearing a helmet for space junk, can you legitimately claim that you believe in this stuff? Like, where are the true believers? Walking the walk. We're supposed to believe this ridiculous stuff, and it doesn't seem like they take it that seriously.
Yeah, I've yet to see anyone protect themselves against chemtrails, even though I hear about it all the time. I've yet to see one.
There are a lot of people making bold claims about how the hurricane was caused by chemtrails, and that's horrifying. Like, if that were true, if the power elite had that ability to create these massive storms and just destroy places, why wouldn't they just own it? Why wouldn't they just come out and just show it? You know, like, hey, look, Neil, we control the weather. We would have no choice. But no, weather modification theories is how the right wingers are trained to respond to fake climate news. So, climate change, geoengineering, weather modification, anybody who claims that the weather is worse than it ever was is programmed. It's a big lie.
I did watch this short clip of a video. I don't know who posted it. I think it was on another server, but he was saying that those cloud seeding machines or whatever that they have on the ground was what NASA uses for the liftoffs, which makes sense to me that they would use that. It kind of creates the same effect.
I'm wondering if they're past the days of putting fireworks in the bottom of cylindrical blimps, if they're just going full on CGI now. And in recent weeks, Musk has said on multiple occasions that, yeah, these videos from space look like CGI. He's admitted that. That's a big deal. But it was a power move. It was like they're taking that from us. So now millions of skeptics can say, hey, this looks like CGI. And he can get in front of it and say, yeah, it does. But it's real. So he took that talking point away from us somehow. I don't quite understand the mechanism. It's like a flat out agreement slash doubling down on the lie. I guess you call that gaslighting. What are you going to believe, your lying eyes or what I tell you? So, yeah, Musk is a gaslighter, top tier programmer and gaslighter. I had someone message me today saying that they're looking at a lot of these channels that have already been there for a long time suddenly jumped on this hurricane story. And he says a lot of these channels are getting their numbers seemingly just pumped up abnormally. Like these are like plants. Sort of like all those massive Q channels. If you remember, if you used to put in your hashtags, stuff like The Awakening or Where We Go One, We Go All, you could blow up. I had a Twitter channel with 5,000 followers because I was pretending to be QAnon. And I was selling the PDF of all the Q drops on Teespring for $5. I made like $200 selling Q drops to noners. Like that's how popular the thing had become at one point. But this is like astroturfing, what like they do in politics. It's a lot of fake people planted in advance, ready to act when the big psyop happens. It's pretty much disaster capitalism. It's definitely there's an element here, I think, of some people just taking advantage of a situation, but there's also just swarms of actors. And they all look like actors to me. They don't look like normal people. They look like they're thespians. They have headshots. They're going to acting agencies and getting roles as extras. They look like extras to me. What do you think? Have any of you looked at these anti-FEMA actors on Twitter or on TikTok, seemingly upset about second and third hand accounts of how bad things are? Because they all look like actors to me.
I've seen a few of those videos, but I'm not on TikTok or Twitter. I see them from other people. But yeah, they look. I mean, it, if that was actually going on, wouldn't you have more emotion involved in it? It's just weird. It doesn't look anything like real life.
You agree that they're pushing the Civil War narrative now?
I have a hearsay. Can you guys hear me? I haven't tested this microphone. This is a new account.
We can hear you.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. My uncle lives in Florida, and he said that I mean, like I said, it's hearsay, but he said there's like 120-mile-an-hour winds and like rained really hard for like 8 hours. But no, he survived and no significant property damage for him. The people along the coastline apparently had a harder time with the damage to their houses.
Well, I believe it. I mean, I do believe that there is a storm, possibly a hurricane, the category they say. But I think the discrepancy lies in what they show us from the satellite imagery, what they report, and what the actors on the ground are saying. Sort of like the Twin Towers were demolished, but was it a terror attack and were there thousands of casualties? Was it caused by planes? And that's all the media augmentation. Basically, we're looking at a regular run-of-the-mill event and they add a bunch of stuff onto it. And so that's kind of what I see here at these hurricanes is that when there's a natural disaster, you have people who are able to just add on to it in the chaos.
I wonder about the intention of these people, or like how many are independent actors, or are there people actually being funded by a greater organization to like collectively fraud this event?
We used to find on websites like Craigslist, there'd be listings for actors needed for a mass casualty event in a big city. And these would generally happen right before a quote real event. And it seems like now the business of crisis acting is largely decentralized. Like you're a remote crisis actor. So it could be that these individuals are responding to an ad. And we need you to read this monologue. But the question of like, are these people all feds? Are they agents? Are they signing NDAs? Yeah, there has to be some quality control and some kind of secrecy built into it. But I know from experience from posting ads as a joke, just to test the waters, there are many out of work actors out there, and they will take any amount of money and do anything. We had so many ads, so many responses, hundreds of people saying, "Yeah, I'll claim I witnessed a mass murder on TV. I'll lie to the news for $50." So I'm just thinking that a lot of these are just actors getting hired remotely. It'd be worthwhile to track them down one by one. Some of them you can just tell. Like this one's like, I'm a volunteer nurse. I heard from somebody's friend who saw something on TikTok that this bad thing happened. And after I hyperventilate for 10 minutes, I'm going to be able to talk about it. And then one of them was like, fake crying after 6 minutes over stuff that she didn't see. And then she says, here's the GoFundMe link. And don't worry, I have a spreadsheet. I will get the wire information from fire departments and I will make sure the money goes where it needs to go because I have a spreadsheet. I'm supposed to look at this person who's not even a good crisis actress and send her some money for her GoFundMe account, assuming it's going to help some victims out there that I don't even know aren't being served by FEMA. So this is a huge psyop. It's also a setup. It's a setup to make it look like the right-wingers are so anti-government they're a danger to the government. And I could see this leading to something. I think they might be setting up another Waco. And I think there's a lot of foreshadowing for it. For example, Trump kicking off his campaign in Waco, Trump in court on the anniversary of Waco, and some guy sets himself on fire outside, just like Dave Koresh was set on fire at Waco. So I think we're being set up for some kind of like right-wing psyop similar to Waco, anti-FEMA. They're building it up. So I think a lot of this is not just for grift and for money, but I think a lot of it is setting up some kind of right-wing anti-government extravaganza. Like, it shouldn't be the case that every single eyewitness could be readily identified as having right-leaning politics. You would have libs out here. You would have people on all sides of the spectrum or non-politicals even. I'm just here and it's terrible, but FEMA's helping us. Like, no, we don't see the pro-FEMA videos. We just see the anti-FEMA videos. And it makes me wonder, it's like there's such a discrepancy here. I think that we can just rule out anything that's not showing us firsthand evidence at this point. We just can't trust it. Show me the bodies entombed in cars. You can get it on the internet, put it on Telegram, let us see it, and then we'll be more inclined to donate money. I'll be more inclined to help out if I see it, but all we're getting are second and third hand accounts. Beyond being annoying, they're creating this narrative that's being bounced off of where major news stories are coming out saying that geoengineering conspiracy theorists are calling meteorologists and threatening their lives. If you remember, they said anti-vaxxers were threatening nurses at COVID stations. Now they're saying anti-geoengineering types are threatening scientists and meteorologists. I had someone send me a message and they said that we need to find out or do an examination of all of the writers and producers behind any kind of Batman or Joker associated cartoon or comic that predicts the Trump thing. And look at all the movies that predict the Trump thing. And then, do a Venn diagram. And this Venn diagram should show us, who's closer to the top of the capstone, who's in the know, with regard to this entire Trump situation, which is still unfolding. I think that'd be worthwhile. And I'm also interested in, it's kind of obvious to me, like I look at these TikTok crisis actors, they're no-name people, and they're put on blast by well-established influencers. So there's a strategy here. They use alt media influencers to prop up crisis actors or right-wing psyops. Like on the news, you have CNN, NBC, mainstream news. They show you the crisis actors, and they sell the story. But to sell the right-wing version of psyops, they rely heavily on their influencers. It's a mirror of the mainstream. Just got to point it out. It's a common misconception that crisis acting is like a left-wing thing to grab your guns, and it's like, no, it's everywhere.
Well, we talked years ago about them bringing the right and the left together eventually, and I don't think either side sees how close they are to the other side. They're oblivious to it. They they think their side's better, which is crazy because both sides almost look the same these days.
And another thing too is both sides do psyops that benefit their narrative and say something against the other side. So they're both in on the psyop entertainment complex. That's a very important point because some will say, well, like on the left, they're saying Trump faked his ear thing, and they can't really go all the way with that line of thinking. And the fact that he faked it would imply that the left and right media are both part of it because they don't blow the whistle on each other. Like you never see right-wing media saying, hey, the libs are faking mass shootings to grab your guns. Alex Jones used to say that, but he pulled back. But they don't call out the other side's psyops. They just bounce off of the event as though it's real. So you have to recognize that the psychological operations are done from the top down, and they're performed or they're written and executed at such a high level that it's above the party distinction. That party distinction is there to maintain the info war, maintain this tug of war. That's the only reason they have it, and that's why it will never be reconciled. They will look like each other at the fringes. The political horseshoe model explains this. They will resemble each other, but they'll never quite touch. So it's not a full circle, it's a horseshoe.
So you don't think eventually they'll bring the two together to create the one world government type of thing? Sort
No,
of.
because the one world government is bifurcated by design. So if you're not going to have a merger of toxic masculinity and feminism. You're not going to have a merger of anti-gun and pro-gun, or anti-needle and pro-needle, anti-immigrant, pro-immigrant. Their attitudes on everything are diametrically opposed, so they never join because it's that polarity that keeps this machine moving. And this is intrinsic to all of their operations. It's always about the split. And the fact that the political horseshoe brings them so close together just, to me, illustrates more than anything that this is the design. You got Proud Boys versus Soy Boys. No, they're never going to agree, but at the same time, they're fighting over the middle. They're trying to convert the middle to their side. And that is the nature of the perpetual war that George Orwell spoke of. That if they got together and became friends, there wouldn't be war. And war is peace, like Orwell wrote. And it literally is. The mind war amounts to physical peace. Like we are existing in a state of more or less peace because everything's going on in our heads and in the simulation.
Well, I mean, that's what it looks like now. But in the future, when all these kids grow up that have been exposed to the trauma in school of drills that don't want guns anymore, what's that world going to look like when it comes to politics? That's where I was kind of looking at.
Yeah, I often wonder if maybe they're setting it up to destroy nationalism and destroy the right wing ideologies and replace it with one world liberalism, which I think might be the agenda eventually. That might be it. So it's not that they're going to merge,
Yeah.
but they're going to get rid of one half. It might be the case because alien invasion predictive programming is so pervasive, and it's all about the one world, dissolution of borders. And what's the barrier to that? Well, for the longest time, Alex Jones has said that American patriots are a firewall against global tyranny. That's the narrative. So they're setting up that
Right.
so that they can tear that down. I think you might be onto something in
Yeah.
the future.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
I can speak from personal experience in this particular category, and I do have some thoughts on the matter as far as the future and the politics of, in particular, in America and firearms ownership. Um, for example, I went to a bullseye shooting competition today. It was the last one of the season, but anyway, the point is, I'm almost always the youngest person there. I go with my dad, and he's like, he was in the army, so he was on the army shooting team, and now he's retired. But so we go bullseye shooting together. But there's not like young people that do very much. It's well, to be fair, bullseye shooting isn't like action fast John Wick stuff, which might attract more young people, but still, demographically, most of the shooting people are older generations, and younger people are not as keen to pick up on that. But I'll transition to my other point and then let you guys have the floor. Um, I think that what people consider a weapon will change over time. So, like in the past, firearms weren't regulated because the technology wasn't as advanced. And even nowadays, as you see these new regulations that affect drones, um, will be some type of examples of the types of weapons regulations in the future, which won't focus on firearms, but other advanced technologies which are only in their infancy now. Um, and I don't know, but yeah, it is a psyop. You have a very good point every time you say, "What good are your guns if you are mind controlled?" It's pointless having all your guns and skills if your mind is, you know, controlled by someone else. That's all.
Great points. Yeah, imagine if you and a group of your friends, let's just say you're patriots, you're Proud Boys, you're 3%er, MAGAs. So you gather up your friends, you get your AR-15s, you get your MAGA hats, and you drive into the tunnel to fight the deep state and the reptoids and the blood drinking rituals. You're going to interrupt those. You're going to stop the vampires because Roseanne Barr told you that they're literal vampires and they eat babies. So you go down to save them and you don't find anything, or you amass an army of people with guns and you're ready to fight the New World Order or the deep state cabal. And once you're gathered, then what? When it turns out that the thing that you're gathered for doesn't exist. It would be like getting all your friends to move into bunkers. Like, hey, let's go move into a big bunker because we're going to get nuked. And you do it, and then it turns out that nukes don't exist. So until you take control of your mind, the least thing you need to be worried about is them taking the guns, because it's like like a big asylum at this point. Any kind of uprising is going to be like a bunch of mental patients rising up against the orderlies. You're not going to get out, and you're not going to take over the mental hospital. I've made this point too with some of the more like aggressively agitated, angry truthers. I've made this point too. I said, I am not interested in activism with brainwashed people. What good is it to build up an army of the brainwashed? It's pointless. You're better off becoming a conscientious objector and stepping out of the Psywar entirely, and then making your move, deciding if there is anything to do. And at this point, I advocate inactivism, and I don't trust activists. If somebody has an agenda, I am very skeptical of it. And we've encountered a lot of people who don't even know they have an agenda because they've been turned into propaganda mules. So some agent put a bunch of propaganda on your back like a mule, and you're going to go run and spread it around, and you're not going to get paid for it because you're chasing a carrot. And I've seen that happen to a lot of people. I've seen it happen to a lot of truthers in general, where they become unwitting carriers of mind viruses. They are the terrorists. Like, we could argue the mainstream media is a terrorist when it convinces you that radical Islamic terrorism exists and they're going to blow up malls in your neighborhood. If they scare you with that stuff, now you live in a state of fear because you trust that authority. Therefore, you can call the news media a terrorist organization if the terrorists don't exist. It's just a mind virus they plant in your head. Similarly, truthers are terrorists if they're filling people up with fears about things that don't exist. Because now they're changing somebody's worldview, adding some negative elements that might actually alarm them, put them in a state of anxiety and fear. And then who's the good guy in this? The truther? I would say no. They're a propaganda mule unwittingly spreading malinformation.
I feel like that's one of the greatest benefits of this philosophy. Um, and usually here we apply it to mainstream media and focusing on like fakery and media fakery. But this applied skepticism and realizing how important it is to examine our motivations before acting. Like if you're gonna make some decision that's affecting your life, how you spend your time, your mental, physical, and well, spiritual, whatever energy, we have so much time a day. We have so much energy too, and we oftentimes don't appreciate our energy and our ability to focus it because our minds are we are all dupable. We are all programmed, and we deprogram kind of one piece at a time, and it's an ongoing process. The whole, I mean, 48 hours of news in one day, but even in the broader sense, the amount of stimulation and information we process every day in our interactions is a lot, and almost all of it's registered subconsciously. We don't have time to like process it all, but it's still like there sitting around unresolved. And the more extreme, emotional or motivational attachments that we have and internalize and refuse to examine, they're going to affect our behavior. And being able to like have that pause and to be like, am I acting on sound information, or am I acting on hearsay or appeals to authority? To analyze the motivations and remove logical fallacies allows our energy to be made usable. So rather than flailing around on a proverbial hamster wheel of someone else's creation, that's designed to keep us, I mean, I think there's a lot of questions about the status quo, whether the capstone people are good or evil and all this stuff. But suffice to say, they obviously set people up with these hamster wheels. And if you're an auto believer, if you're a mainstream media plus type, you're going to be in the hamster wheel. You're not living your life. You're in somebody else's, virtual reality game. And you know, just we're very lucky to be able to take one foot off of the hamster wheel for a moment, and most people don't do that very much.
Yeah, I'm looking back and I cannot think of the last time that a psyop fooled me where I was like reacting to it and then later found out I was wrong and that it was fake. I've applied the fake until proven real approach for some time and it has not failed me. But also I'm recognizing when I am where I am dupable, and as studied as I am on these matters, I watched an episode of The Penguin before I recognized that I was looking at a mask. I didn't know that was Colin Farrell. So even I, just even being wary of these things, these tricks bypass like an optical illusion. They bypass your awareness. So you have to be at least aware that trickery is being used and we are susceptible to it. And normies, especially space believers, they don't have that. They don't think of trickery as being in the realm of possibility. They don't think of special effects as being relevant to the conversation of news. They don't even think of propaganda as something that could be so sophisticated they don't even notice it. And it's a sort of conceit and arrogance and ego in many ways that keeps the normies or anybody in their box from looking outside of their box. And until you can admit that, yeah, I'm dupable, I can be tricked, then you are a mark at this point. You are right where they want you. They want you to be overconfident in your quote perceptions because you think you're thinking for yourself. But what does it matter if you think for yourself if you're not perceiving for yourself? So yeah, I think for myself, but I outsource my perception with regard to these issues to these corporate news agencies, trusting that they're not all secretly controlled by global government. Like that's ridiculous. That is not critical thinking. That is not thinking for oneself. That is outsourcing a sizable chunk of thinking to known pathological liars. It's naive at this point.
Yeah, as far as the NASA fanboys go, not only that, they scoff at the fact that about the ability to fool. They just disregard it totally as if it could never possibly exist because they love their ignorance that much.
It's the emperor's new clothes. Where they're all in on it on some level, and they don't want to appear to be unsophisticated. They just buy into the constant drum of anti-conspiracy theory propaganda where it's like, if you don't believe the screen, there's something wrong with you. And that to me is principally gaslighting. But yeah, it's pretty bad. The people who are truly faithful adherents in this thing believe all the space stuff because they see it on the screen. They're making an error in looking at the screen as, quote, scientific evidence. No, video isn't evidence. It wouldn't pass in court. There has to be context. You have to know who filmed it. And a lot of the times, what people think is video from space in particular is a camera view within a simulated environment. It's not a physical camera. And there are tells. But these arrogant glurfs they'd rather mock you asking questions, and they get into ad hominem instead of looking at it critically. We had like a week-long debate with someone on Twitter about this bulging forehead vein on an upside-down astronaut, where he's like, that's not a bulging forehead vein. And so we debate, and eventually he felt like he won on that point, and so then I move on to the next point. What happened to his cheekbones? This astronaut had well-defined cheekbones and sunken cheeks. His skin was kind of pale and a little splotchy in places. Wasn't perfect. But then in the next shot, when he's upside down, his face is swollen like a tomato. His eyes are nearly closed. And I said he looked more like Kim Jong-il. Like, how did he make that switch? And the only explanation is literally gravity, upside down, blood rushing to his head. And this guy refused to see it and instead spent his time launching personal attacks at me, which at this point I'm immune to it. But that's the best they can do.
So I have a similar about 3/11 and the shutdown. So the night before the actual shutdown in San Francisco, I was like, I've had it. I'm going to go public. I don't care how many friends I lose on Facebook or real friends. I mean, of course, I wasn't expecting that, but it certainly happened. But first day, I said, okay, here's what I'm going to try to demonstrate to everybody as far as what I had learned about media fakery by the time March 11th, 2020 came around, the night before, actually. And I had made a suggestion to everybody. I said, do you personally, are you feeling the effects of, the reason for the shutdown? I'll try to keep it censor friendly here. And or anyone you personally know, and have you witnessed it? Is someone you actually have in your life that you can vouch for their claims? Now, just by simply suggesting that I was questioning the media, whether left or right, at this point, it was all just, this terror that nobody had really bifurcated it totally at that point with the Trump scenario and everything that followed between the two and the warp speed and all of that. Now, it took 2 weeks for anybody to actually suggest they knew anybody who was feeling the effects of anything broadcast by the media. Now, in between those 2 weeks, I probably had, and I should go back to the thread and actually count it, but I'm pretty sure it's close to about 100 or 200 messages of people lambasting me because I was questioning the media. That was the real sickness, of course, the mental virus that everybody was being affected by. But yeah, even then, after 2 weeks, it was like a sneeze and a cold. So it was really fascinating and somewhat depressing to see that people were so emotionally upset over me disbelieving their TV religious gods.
Yeah, it certainly took on the characteristics of a religion quite early on, where it really did become a way for the government-controlled media, for the state, to be the savior. Their priests, their injectable Eucharist, they're the savior, and the people who reject the church doctrines, that is, those who reject mass media, then become the heretics, the non-believers, and the sinners, those who are refusing to be saved. So it did become a salvation scenario. And that's when I realized this is really nothing more than the introduction of the concept of sin to a scientific audience. So they brought the God construct of Gaia to the godless atheists. They brought the modern concept of heaven, which is outer space, to the same. And in order to get them to believe in sin and regulate, they introduced this new element. And isn't it notable, too, how the political left, who are largely aligned with scientism, don't believe in sin? You could not get them to cease their wicked behavior and sinful behavior because they don't believe in it. They mock the people who have traditional moral values. But the instant they introduced this new iteration of sin, the V, what happened? Overnight, the lefties became Puritans. Overnight, they had a puritanical revolution. And yet the right wing, they didn't want to be Puritans about this. They didn't see these they don't recognize the left's concept of sin. So it's really just an archaic religious construct introduced to the masses. So it's 100% accurate to call it a sin. And when you were speaking, you were blaspheming. So you were leading them into heresy. You were like an atheist to a religious cult. So they probably got triggered on those grounds.
Absolutely. And you could see it within their communication. You mentioned this previously as well, but it was all emotional. There was no science behind anything or no trying to be factually based in their communication. And people, it was fascinating on so many levels, but generally speaking, yeah, I was the heretic and heretic, and the nature of people getting riled up was solely about being poked from their deep sleep. They needed to protect their nightmare, and they did it with vociferous communication. It was shocking, but expected as well, because I had never really tried to communicate en masse with many of my friends because I'm aware that it wouldn't go very well. And, I predicted the reaction, but indeed, just by lending some doubt to their, I don't know, for lack of a better phrase, their biblical reading of the media was enough to create just extreme emotional reaction. And that was the key. There was no logic. There was no reason. There was no thought trading. I mean, this forum here is a great example of just throwing ideas at each other. And for the most part, I've rarely heard people, maybe Lynn getting a little bit off center when some things got into her nerves a bit, which I respect, of course. But and I'm not calling anybody out particularly. It happens. It'll happen to me, I'm sure. But at the same time, this is a great forum for having exploration be the key. And if anybody was thinking with their reasonable mind, then they could have figured this thing all out on their own. They wouldn't have needed any consultation with anyone. It would have just been a matter of everybody, let's put our facts on the table and let's make the best sense out of it. But by simply throwing out the question mark, it was enough to bring pitchforks and fire branding torches to try to burn down anything that I was curious about. I was treated basically like a child who was crazy. And actually, a side note, because the thought of insanity came up, I actually had a friend who suggested in a public forum that I should be committed. So those are the friends I have.
Yeah, I love that.
Back to Tim, I'd like to go back to what Hummingbird was saying about skepticism and the not acting in their mouse wheels. Okay, so there's something called epoche, which is like just suspending judgment or just living in suspended skepticism of what you're seeing, what they're telling you. And that can make you not act. And then there's, well, if I just dig a little more, I will find the truth. Like, you can just keep searching to try to solve your skepticism. It's like, well, if I had this much more information, I would know how to act. And I have definitely fallen into that category, and probably everyone here has. It's not that you don't really want to act, but that you need a little bit more information. You don't want to be duped again. And then as a foil to that to just try to act in creativity, like within your own real space. Therefore, you don't have to have the answers to all these things to live an active life. Because the societal approved actions are not really, they don't make sense anymore. Like, I live in an area when COVID hit and everybody locked down, all the lady friends of mine we're all getting together in sewing circles to make homemade masks. And it was exactly like 9/11, which I fell for. I had young children then, and we would have little craft time with the kids and make American flags. And I was the leader of that. I was like, every kid's gonna go home with their homemade American flag pin. But when this happened again around here, and it was homemade masks, with the cute fabrics and all that crap, I was like, here we go again. So anyway, I just was going to throw that out there. You don't have to have all the answers to live a creative life, and see what everybody thinks about that.
Well, great points as far as epichy and suspension of judgment. If we don't have enough information, we suspend judgment, but we have to keep searching. There has to be some kind of good faith effort to find out the truth. I'm totally against just asking questions. I'm all for asking questions and seeking answers. But and as far as that, the mask and the flag thing, isn't that interesting? I think I've noted that before, where it seemed like after 9/11, American flags were everywhere. If you weren't waving an American flag, you were with the terrorists. And the mask, in a way, became the same virtue signal. I'm against the terrorists. I'm against the thing which is the terrorist, or the super spreaders. So the mask and the flag bumper sticker were visible ways of signing or signaling your allegiance, your complicity, in your side in the mind war. And not wearing a mask or not waving a flag sent a completely opposite signal. So they do like to give us props, and they do like to involve us in their side wars. And it's hard to be a non-participant, because if you're not participating, you're automatically on the bad side. I'm not participating, so I'm with the terrorists. I'm not participating, so I'm an asymptomatic super spreader misinformationist. They don't give you an opt-out.
That was funny, Echo Charlie, what you said about the masks. The Star Spangled Banner, right, was prominent on 9/11, and it starts out with "Oh, say, can you see?" And everybody was covered up with a mask in 2020, so they couldn't say anything. Technically, it was muffled. So that's pretty funny. I never made that connection before, but yeah.
Yeah, I think you could correlate the symbol of the mask with the covering of the mouth, with the censorship of speech. And they even said speaking loud, singing. They made these direct correlations, but the idea is that mind
Oh yeah, yeah,
viruses
yeah.
come out of your
Okay.
mouth. That's a very powerful symbolism.
Yeah, and another well-timed aspect of the psyop, which I couldn't believe people couldn't see it right in front of their faces, but the calling cry or what have you, the kind of underlying statement of GF, George Floyd psyop, was "I can't breathe." Well, what's on your face? What's causing you not to breathe right now? And the synonymousness or the synergy of those two things, I think, was very powerful, and of course on purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, "I can't breathe" is an anagram for "a better China," which ties in smoothly with BLM, the left, Marxist class warfare, and BLM being the vanguard of a Marxist revolution. And I can't breathe can be applied to Gaia, who can't breathe because capitalism has polluted her atmospheres with too much carbon. So yes, I can't breathe is like a zeitgeist slogan. They've attached it to the zeitgeist. We can't breathe. Humanity can't breathe. There was a Roland Emmerich film, Moonfall. He's the guy that did Independence Day that prepared us for 9/11. Well, Moonfall has a lot of space junk falling from the sky. And there's a scene where, as the moon starts falling, the atmosphere is breaking apart. And there's this young, and this is all, I think, symbolism. A young immigrant girl says, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. So then an older male takes off his mask and gives it to her so she can breathe. So he sacrifices his life for her because the atmosphere is dissipating. But I see a lot of this stuff in movies, and as we talk about often, but this is like coded messaging here. The whole asphyxiation thing, the West or the oppressors kneeling on the neck of the poor. Like they've told us this story in so many ways, and that's definitely one of the main zeitgeist messages.
Another layer to that is the majority of the masks in 2020 came from China, which is why they wear masks over there, because they are industrialized and they got all the American manufacturing jobs basically, and they pollute. So that's why they wear the mask. So, I mean, how ironic, right?
They spread it through the mechanism of like fashion trends. They use fashion. And the way fashion works is you have a unfashionable haircut and you're the only one, you kind of stand out. And peer pressure, not through what they say, but maybe ostracism or sideways glances, angry stares or mocking stares. There are various ways that the group mind coerces the individual into joining. And so they use fashion as a mechanism for spreading uniformity of thought. And fashion is about uniforms. And so it's kind of an interesting connection here between, I think, fashion and fascism. And that's kind of what we saw. I called it a fascist statement at that point, because it means I'm in line with big government. I'm against the private sector. I don't think we should question government-sponsored media. So that's what the messaging was. And it was peer pressure. And I often, point out how the programmers rely on the programmed to program each other. And this is one example of how they enforced it.
Yeah, the entire population of the world carried 2020. I mean, I saw it here in my little town I live in. It's like even the cops here came out and said they weren't going to enforce anything that the health department said. That they never had time, they never had the manpower, they weren't going to do it. But yet all the businesses invoked it, even though they didn't have to. They were told they didn't have to because nobody was going to be there if nobody complied. But they did it anyway. It was insane.
It was also educational. I think it was that showed me how alternative media is there to serve as the counter. The anti is the same team as the pro. And antis don't like that. In my view, and in actuality, if you're an activist within the political horseshoe, you're in the mind control arena. And you can't just be a single issue. Like, I'm only brainwashed on this issue, or I'm only an activist on this one issue. Because now you're aligning yourself with that worldview. That's why I've drawn such a firm line in the sand here with regard to QAnon nonsense and weather weapon conspiracies and that kind of thing. Because the people who fall for that are a different demographic. There's an entire shift that needs to happen first.
That's a great point. And one of the things I saw through the shutdown, it's obvious the IPS has gone over this a million times, but the nature of how the left-right dynamic was used from the very beginning, where there was initial doubt about the thing, and then there was a gradual kind of reluctant move to say, okay, maybe there's something going on here. It's more than just a cold or whatever. But that was masterful. I saw through that PSYOP how intricately they were able to manipulate the, let's say, even, I hate to use the word skeptical in this case because no one was skeptical, but even for those that were questioning it just to a limited degree in the beginning, were slowly but surely brought along on this ride, more or less, over the course of about 2 years before it ran its course. And what was initially a doubtful scenario, the right, headed by the orange captain, was the one who really had the ability to morph that entire echelon of the right in the direction that they were cultivating and really trying to manifest, so that anybody who would gradually kind of look at it at the beginning was full on with the Trump salesman with the pharmaceutical industry and so forth. By the end, he was the greatest salesman of all time. So that, too, much like many other dynamics over the shutdown, really painted a more in-depth, more high-resolution picture of how they manipulate people through the course of these events. In this case, a very long-term event, one of the big PSYOPs, but it wasn't just full-on, let's turn on the lights and go for our end result. No, it took many months to watch that transition happen. It was fascinating.
I think the anti-geoengineering group, like if you're like, I'm not anti-geoengineering for a couple of reasons. One, geoengineering is not what geoengineering conspiracy theorists think it is. I've heard some say, well, have you heard of geoengineering? It's like, have you looked up geoengineering? Geoengineering not only doesn't exist, it's a list of hypothetical, yet to be developed processes by which they can combat climate change. As I call it, it's a fake solution for a fake problem. So geoengineering isn't really a thing, but in the imaginations of the right, they've conflated it with weather manipulation and HARP and Bill Gates phobia. They've conflated it into this monster, and now they're anti-geoengineering. And I would argue that anti-geoengineeringism is the same as anti-vax, where the controlled opposition is told, believe in the thing, but fear the cure. So the controlled opposition right believes in the V, they believe in the pandemics. They just think it was created by China, but they're afraid of the cure. Now, when it comes to the climate change, now they believe in climate change on the right. They just think it was caused by geoengineering. Interestingly, geoengineering is the cure for climate change. So in both instances, they're against what the left sees as the cure for the problem that they both agree exists. This is like, it's mental jiu-jitsu, where they get both sides to accept a really bad premise. And once they have them accepting it, they just fight over the cause. And what they're doing is they're blaming each other. Left blames private sector, right blames government. It is such a template. And it's important to point out the template and expose it for what it is, so the people in it can start to appreciate how they're in a box. This is where AutoHoax Con, the AutoHoax conventions come in, because we need to, on a case-to-case basis, guardrail by guardrail, go into some nuanced descriptions of what we're looking at, and then deconstruction, taking things down, taking them apart. So I'm thinking, the next one is on the 26th, and I might use my slot, like a 90-minute slot, to make the best case I possibly can that 9/11 was merely a movie from a metascript perspective. Not talking about engineers or jet fuel temperatures or any of these other red herrings. I'm just saying from a metascript perspective, can I make the case that this was a movie production, superimposed over the news cycle. And I think that's going to be my focus because I want to differentiate what we're doing, what truthers do. They're bouncing off of mainstream views, thinking something happened. And we're noticing that we have come to appreciate the fact that alt and mainstream are making history via fake news. And we have to call it out from that perspective. So that's going to be the topic I'm going to focus on. And I'm also going to be in advance creating some additional content for the visuals of these events, because AutoHoax Con number 2 I think will be bigger than the first one, and I think we'll cover more ground. I have a lot of people reaching out. So anybody here, by the way, if there's any specific topic that you think we need to address in AutoHoax Con, anything you would like to see broken down succinctly, feel free to comment or let us know, and I'm sure somebody can get on it.
Well, I'm glad you brought up number 2, which I'm really excited about. I like your idea a lot. I think it's spot on to expose that angle of 9/11. And if you're interested, we haven't really chatted about it outside of the Patreon chat, but knowing what you're focusing on here for a segment, whatever time's available, if you and all are interested, then I can focus my, let's say, contribution, much like the last one. I can just center it in on aspects of 9/11 that really demonstrate that it is indeed a stage play. And having watched probably tens of hours of material from 9/11 for this documentary, which I have yet to release, and I'm probably just going to be doing short segments from here on out. But I watched hours and hours and hours of 9/11 stuff, and I'd already been aware that, of course, it wasn't a false flag. And along the way, I started to seriously doubt that anybody was injured at all, not because I hadn't heard of that before. It's just something I hadn't tried to verify myself. But after watching all of this material, it was quite clear that it was just terrible acting, one terrible scene after another. And one that I've noted on a previous call, maybe over a year ago with you, Tim, is that I watched many of the scenes where the mayor was walking around the city, post-event. He has nobody guarding him. I mean, there's a big group of people, and he's a lot like some kind of Napoleon character, like pointing to people and being authoritative and like, we're going to go over here to the bunker. And like, this is all not secret. It's being broadcast and recorded to the entire, at least New York City, if not the earth. And it was very, very, very clear at that point that all of it was contrived. But anyway, that's one of the things I can focus on if you and others are interested, to try to let that be maybe a shorter segment of what I contribute, is layering in some of that video material that backs that up, or the metascripting aspect of it.
You do have an extensive body of research on it. I actually think what I'm probably going to do as more of a priority is maybe get into the Trump 713 head wound as a fake event from a metascript perspective. I might make that my focus, because I have been finding so many connections between Trump, Nero, Joker, all these various scenarios that show the blending of the world stage, fake events, and the entertainment news. But I think it might make more sense for me to focus on the Trump head wound on this next one. But I do want to continue to examine all these events, quote, from a metascript perspective. Not a false flag perspective, but a metascript perspective. And I think we make a much stronger case, because now we're showing that the true culprits are the directors, that these events aren't even real, and that the narratives and the propaganda analysis that we go through reveals all this stuff. So I'm probably going to focus on the 713 thing now that I think about it, especially in light of this latest Joker movie. And of course, the findings in the Cape Crusader, where the Trump proxy gets his ear cut.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Well, the 713 thing, I don't mean to interrupt, but the 713 thing, if you actually look at where the fake bullet was coming in, it looks like a plane. And Trump standing there like a tower, it would be almost in the same place that 846 happened on 9/11. So
That's
just
a really good
throwing that out
connection.
there.
No, that is a great connection because you got George Bush on 9/11 and they're whispering into his ear. The bullets whizzing by Trump's ear, same photographer, which connects these two ideas, 9/11 and the bullet. Then on his head, he has the 4547, which gives you 9/11. So in many ways, yeah, I think you're right. I think that is probably even intentional. That it could be mistaken for a plane. That is interesting.
And I was just going to add as well that some of the video that I had been putting together just after the Trump scenario, I tried to get an episode out on that, and I got overwhelmed by other things in life. But there is so much material out there that compiling that was also something I've already done, so I could contribute that too if if that's the target that you're going to be hitting.
Yeah, that'd be excellent. I mean, because I think each one of these AutoHoax cons is going to be very educational, not just to people who already know what's going on, but to noobs. It could be accessible because we are providing some pretty compelling evidence that there is a conspiracy. Like there is a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy theory. But we have been conquered ubiquitously as a human race. There is a power elite. And people don't want me to say that. Don't say elite. Why not? They control your mind. And that's a descriptive term, and it has a lot of connotations with L and Saturn and the symbolism, time-space control. And they control time and space. They control history because they write it. So at some point, we just need to recognize that this is a simulation, and it does have builders. And what we are doing is we are exposing its architecture and its architects systematically. And anybody listening to AutoHoax Con should be able to walk away, especially if they're really informed about these things, with even more certainty about what we're really looking at here. And I'm all about certainty and getting to conclusions rather than sitting out there in the fog of Psy-War and confusion and acting like confusion and asking questions is a replacement for enlightenment, which it's not. And a lot of truthers are like, mind blown. I'm confused. This is so crazy. It's like, well, actually, it's not. It's propaganda and it's high tech, and we just need to figure out how it works. So I'm trying to keep everything objective, and we're providing a lot of food for thought. You know, like your last presentation, reverse history, when you really got into the weeds there with the various narratives in individual cartoons, where yeah, there's no way this could be random. And the fact there's consistency and multiple instances attributed to the same writers and directors, at this point, it's case closed. We're examining a meta-scripted, news-bent world stage simulation.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to your thought about the elites, I got into many conversations about this with people. That the reason I use that word is because they are L-ites. That's just how they describe themselves. They're probably, they would use many other terms, likely, but that seems to be an all-encompassing aspect. L being that Saturn relation and other aspects of maybe one of their mystery religions from afar, but. Yeah, it is case closed. It's there. And going back to something else you were thinking about, maybe this would be a subject matter for future AutoHoax Con, is that you inspired me to try to diagram how each side of the polarized sides look at an issue where maybe there was no conscious relation to something that they were trying to propagandize, that being the elite controllers, and yet they implant simultaneously the same idea in each, but the approach to get there is, clearly different. But in the end, without anybody being aware, they do become aware of it. But like demonstrating those aspects of the writers and cartoons and so forth, I think it would be relatively, quote unquote, easy. It'd take a lot of time to gather the sources, but to really tell the story from the left-right dynamic and show those guardrails and how in the end, you may seem like you have enemies of the other or the opposite, but you all do really love each other because you do think the same way ultimately.
anybody who just got here, this is going to be uploaded into the usual podcast archives, and I will likely premiere it, and I'll promote the premiere. But yeah, this is going to be a twice a week podcast called the IPS Deep Think Tank. So it's open floor, any topics. Right now we're kind of talking about AutoHoax Con number 2, and I'm inviting anybody to take a time slot and speak on a topic, present something, or suggest topics. And this is going to be happening on October the 26th. So a couple Saturdays from now. Just a heads up.
Hey, um, okay, so I had a couple thoughts. There might be a bit out of order, but like this synchronicity, and it's important to make a distinction between like the real experienced synchronicities versus metascript synchronicities. Um, and some of the obvious pointers on the metascript is like the politicizing and obvious dichotomies that are mirrors. Um, and as far as organic, real synchronicities, it's something that's personal and impossible to be explained in any other way. Um, so that's kind of a real quick breakdown. I love the point you made about like, human existence and how we all have the same inner core structure, intuition, spirituality thing going on. Like these people who claim to hate each other and they're at the bleeding edge of civil war, ready to go whatever, punch and kill each other for, waving the other party's sign in their yard or something. And like when you actually deconstruct their ideologies, they're actually like generally good, benevolent people who want the best for themselves and the world around them. And, it's important to, I don't know, auto hoax misanthropy, perhaps, if that's the right word. Anyway, yeah.
Great suggestion, V. That's awesome.
I find that there's like an element of misanthropy built into the leftist paradigm and the right. But the leftist paradigm has it that man is bad for Gaia. And it's largely because of our greed. It's because of our selfishness. We're not collectivist enough, and we're destroying the planet. So you have this guilt trip built into progress, into consuming things, into doing well, which is kind of like suggesting you embrace asceticism. And that's built into the left. And the idea is that man is intrinsically bad for Gaia and needs to expiate his carbon footprint. And you have climate confessionals. And it's a mirror of the other side, traditional values, that man is sinful and needs to purify himself of his sinful nature because sin will trigger the wrath of God. So both have the idea that if individuals don't fix themselves, there's going to be collective punishment from the God construct. Both sides agree that man is bad and needs to change to please God, or man is bad and needs to change to please government or the collective. And so there's like misanthropy encoded into both sides, and it puts us, since man is low and bad, it puts us beneath the God construct. And then you look at, well, who made the God construct? Who created these myths? And I think that's a big part of how they get us to collectively genuflect to state power, accept our lowly nature. It's a submission thing that, we're bad. We all agree we're bad. And if you don't agree you're bad, you're in denial and you need to be saved. And so they have this built-in hatred for the other side.
Yeah, I think that's even in biblical scripture to the sides and all that. And I think that's their playbook. I honestly do.
I do agree that it is their playbook. I mean, that is the book in the Masonic Lodge, the Bible, that is. And the Bible myths, the Bible's a template for mind control, in my opinion. And so I look at Noah's myth, Noah's flood, as just having been brought back in this modern context. And I think many things take that form. But also on the esoteric side, you get into the black and the white pillar, the Masonic Lodge. That comes from King Solomon. It's all biblical lore, biblical symbolism, and it is one of the main sources of artistic inspiration. But I think that it goes into an initiated interpretation of what the Bible is. And I think that the power elite worship nature. I say pantheistic, but they worship nature. They're panpsychism. I don't think of them as Satanists or belonging to one particular branch of the Abrahamic faiths. Like I look at Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and atheism as Abrahamic religions. And atheism, which is scientism and Nasatology, is an iteration of the Abrahamic religions. It's all about Saturn, which is a symbol of time. And it's about time control. And I'm saying that they control time. They literally control time. They have time travelers, which are basically actors that they insert onto the world stage. They write the history, act it out on the stage in front of us, and it goes into our history books. So in a very real way, they have asserted total control over time and I think space. As far as like they make they write our maps, they write our borders. And if we're right about any of this, let's say we're right about everything. There's a unity in mind control from space on down, and this would include ISS as the biggest example. If this is all true, then it could be the case that countries are there as part of space control, preventing movement. Borders are there not to protect you from what's outside, to keep you in your sheep pen, so that the power elite can maintain control over history and geography, time, space.
Yeah, I completely agree, Tim. I'll just jump in on one thought there and just say that to me, this is my interpretation, just kind of coloring that a little bit and just saying that these are just open air human farms. They're arbitrary. They are meant to keep people divided. I can't help but, and I think someone else, maybe Portal or Plain Decoded mentioned this before about the hopium of extra lands outside or whatever's been mapped that we're aware of. And this is something that becomes really pertinent to me is getting to a point where we can get beyond those arbitrary borders. And I'm not promoting anything per se here, but when I think about this in a fantasy way, when I think about what I want, if you will, is to be a free man and go wherever I want. And to have a passport and all these other things, these are parts of these balls and chains that hold people into their centrally managed areas, their space-time continuums that are devoted or made or conformed or controlled by these governments. So it's interesting to me. I appreciate that model as you just described it. And ultimately, this is one of those things that as people become skeptical or begin to think for themselves, these borders really do start to dissipate. And I see that they are arbitrary in history for the sake of this control. And really, if you start looking at the fakery of wars and these other things, then it's clear it's just all part of the stage play.
Yeah, and this also trickles down to the mind, right? The space of the mind. They control that too with a lot of people. I mean, not saying they actually control it. They put the internet there for that control because people are, not doing the things that they should be doing or would be doing, spending time on the internet. just watching 1 minute videos. So space, taking up space.
I don't think control's too strong a word to use here, mind control. Because if you look at interpersonal relationships, like in a cult, a family, or just a couple, if one person in a position of authority is a liar, they can selectively remove elements from reality from everybody else. They can remove their own indiscretions. They can prevent, or rather present fake issues. They can manipulate money. There's so many ways to control people through lying. So at a basic level, if you buy into the internal model of the world that they give us, you're accepting a structure given to you by liars. And if you believe the liars, you are mind controlled. Like Truman. In the Truman Show, wasn't physically held on the movie set. It was the mental construct of the world, built by lies, upheld by liars, that kept him from leaving. So I think that one of the most powerful forms of magic is lying. I have a manuscript I've been working on for a while called The Lie World Order, where I am suggesting that we are in a collective Truman Show. But it's not that it's a physical stage, but it's the mental stage, and it's held up primarily by lies. And as long as we fail to identify lies, have some nuance in our definitions, we're going to be spellbound. And one of Aleister Crowley's more famous grimoires is called The Book of Lies. And I was always put off by that. It's like, is he calling himself a liar? What does he mean by this? And having re-examined it, it has to do with this theory of magic being reality manipulation through essentially by any means necessary to effect change. And this includes acts of will. It includes manipulation. Various forms of magic don't involve candles and spells, but really just involves the use of symbols and words in order to manipulate the minds of others. And so I think lying is underestimated for the powerful weapon that it is. And
Yeah,
also, when let's say one more thing here, is just the lies by omission. So maybe they don't lie to you overtly over the course of an hour of news watching, but they omitted 95% of the stuff that's far more relevant that might convey something different. So they lie by omission more than anything.
Yeah, and my comment there is really just validating or echoing what you just said. The lying by omission is extremely important to their censorship and their way of speaking those things they want people to focus on, and the other 99.9 billion% of everything that's in reality is left out. But certainly, just to underscore the idea of the new or the old lie world order, as I've heard you call it before, it is the method essentially of managing the mass consciousness. And I don't know how his name's pronounced. It's Epictetus or something like that. But liars are the reason for all ills in the world, or something similar to that. And I see it as a fundamental, for lack of a better word here, truth about the fact that this is how they create these demons of fiction and other aspects of fear in all kinds of angles and aspects of life, that no stone is left unturned with their miscoloring of reality, all directed towards their news bent focus and ending, or their kind of direction that they're hurting people in. But it is all based on the fiction, the lie, the disconnection from reality.
Yeah, great points. And in my forthcoming, I mean, I don't know, I don't have a publication date in mind for this. It's something that I'm just building up long term because I think it's a very complex topic. And you have different types of lies, different types of liars. You have witting liars, unwitting liars. You have propaganda mules. You have well-intentioned spreaders of mistruths. You have perceivers who are susceptible to what I'd call sleight of mind or logical fallacies, visualize optical illusions, people who are deep fakeable, media illiterate. They can't tell real from fake, so they become de facto liars. Then you have liars by tradition, habit, and conformity. And so it ultimately what I'm suggesting is that stepping outside of the screen is primarily an act of true honesty. And it requires recognizing that I am dupable and I am or have been rendered, I have been made into a liar. The world made me a liar, and I'm trying to unlie. And there's a pretty interesting movie called The Room about this kidnapped woman, or she's 17, kidnapped girl, in a shed based on a true story. And then she has a child in captivity. And to protect the child from the abuser, she tells him lies. She says, there's nothing outside of this room. This is the entire world. And so it's called Room. And when he reaches 5, she believes at that point he's capable of escape. And she works out a plan with him to escape. It's all very symbolic. Like he has to get wrapped up in a rug, he plays dead, and then he's resurrected from the dead on the outside by escaping. And he sees this new, wider world outside the box. But when she tells him, you're going to leave the room, he calls her a liar. He won't believe his mother that there's anything outside of the room that they're in. And she says, no, I was lying to you for your protection for the first 5 years, but now I am unlying. And I had never heard the word unlying before, so I wanted to add it to the lexicon because I think that's what we need to do individually. Recognize where we've been lied to, what lies we've internalized, and we have to cease lying to ourselves. And logical fallacies are ways they get you to lie to yourself without knowing it because you just took an easy answer that was served in a way that made it very palatable. The fact is, logical fallacies turn you into a liar, a carrier of lies, whether you know it or not.
This also reminds me of L. Just the liar part of it. The L's upon L's upon L's of the layers of lies that we've had to endure, I guess.
I've been referencing Frank Herbert's quote from Dune about how they're not mad, they're believers. They've been trained to believe because knowledge is dangerous and belief can be manipulated. So the word belief, I know it's a cliche, it does contain the word lie in it, but I think that's very appropriate. That the believer is a liar themselves. In other words, they've accepted a truth that they can't verify. They've accepted what can only be logically described as a lie. They have good intentions. They have happy lies. They believe in this benevolent scenario. They believe in good things. Whatever, they believe in their own self-righteousness. So there's this idea that believers are intrinsically good people. They're doing the right thing, or that beliefs are sacrosanct. And I say no. At this point, I'm done with people just asking questions. It's time to know. We're in the information age. We shouldn't settle for being mere believers. When we watch a guy on TikTok talking about how bad things are in this part of the country, we shouldn't change our worldview according to his words. Let's say you believed all these FEMA crisis actors. Now your world model contains this new element. FEMA's out to get you. FEMA coffins, FEMA controlled weather. Now you live in a different world because you've allowed them to alter your reality. And that's what magic is. Magic, fundamentally, is about causing changes in reality through magic, which is spellcraft, and spellcraft is ultimately comes down to your will put into words, spelled out. Spellcasting is fundamentally about narratives and stories and memes. So it just seems to me that I think we live in a construct that this internalized construct that is very malleable, that lies affected. That's why I was saying that the people who are under the authority of a liar are just programmed. They're totally controlled. And what we're in is a closed system, and there's a worldview monopoly, and the only acknowledged news or acknowledged worldviews out there are approved. And I think that's the main point here, is that the believers who accept everything on TV are conforming to a model that doesn't match the terrain. And to the extent that they're adhering to a model that doesn't match, I'm calling them liars, self-deceivers. And I got some pushback on it because the word liar has so many negative implications, but that's all the more reason to use it, in my opinion. And truthers are liars. I think that's something else that can be said. It's because of their operating system. They have good intentions, they want to wake up the world, but because of their bad operating systems, because of their bad programming, truthers are just a subset of mainstream liars.
That's a great point. Many great points. And one thing I'll add here, too, regarding magic and lies, I agree with that sense of application to how their control mechanism works. And there's a level of how people have been, well, one of the basic ways that I've been able to synopsize this in a sense of how people's consciousness has been hijacked is that let's just clear the slate and say there's a primordial man or woman and they're out in nature. Well, their mind is such a powerful tool that they have the ability to remember that, oh, one of our tribe members got eaten by a lion. So from now on, whenever they see a lion, that picture of a lion, they can prepare and probably defend themselves better than they would have otherwise. And on a very, very overly simplistic level, these controllers and mind manipulators have taken advantage of what is the great power, if you will, or potential of a human being, is the mental capacity to map reality, so much so that you can prevent death and other aspects of your existence by knowing or projecting the potential of what you've measured in the past to apply it to the future. And on a very, very fundamental level, the controllers have hijack that one essence, and instead of real lions or real bears or any other aspects, even of nature, actually, which of course can be seen in its actual impact in reality, but they have really at a fundamental level implanted these ideas. And I think somewhere along the way, this is something that I'd like to try to nail down in some of my future presentations, is to show people how ideas are as real in this society as anything you can touch or see, and that's not healthy. That aspect of our great potential to imagine or plan or predict has been completely railroaded into fantasy. And it was talked about earlier in this deep think tank about the nature of how much of our society's lives are wasted on the imaginary. And this is something I think as soon as some people have an ability to consider that their ideas are powerful, but it's now a prerequisite for anything you contemplate going forward to divine whether that's something connected to reality or whether it's something out of a stage play or a comic book or something completely intangible and totally disconnected from reality.
Yeah, I've introduced the term hyperstitions to deal with these. So the hyperstition refers to, and this is from a website, if I look just a general meaning of it, definition is beliefs or stories through their very existence and dissemination bring about their own reality or truth. So, for example, the space junk phenomenon. There's so many stories that it's there, people are talking about it, and eventually it just becomes an accepted part of our world. Like, it's an accepted part of our world that space junk is a real thing, yet none of us have actually seen it or examined it. All of our information is coming from the same sources, but it's been given a stamp of approval. It's like we're in the desert of the designated real. They designate something real in the simulation, it's suddenly real. And most people live in a world of hyperstitions. And I think this is also another part of it too, is that hyperstitions are reinforced by the dominant paradigm. They all kind of nod their heads and agree. And you can see this in churches, where they reinforce each other's religious experiences, or UFO cults. Oh, I got abducted. Oh, me too. Did you get probed? Yeah, me too. And they have this chorus that builds a false consensus in an environment that promotes that belief. So I would call those hyperstitions more than superstitions, because hyperstition implies a cybernetic relationship, that there's a loop going on. And this is similar to what Polybius wrote when he was talking about the use of superstition, maintaining the cohesion of the Roman state. I would say hyperstitions maintain the cohesion of our modern world. That the PSYOP entertainment complex introduces and reinforces the existence of modern superstitions. And I'm calling them hyperstitions because, unlike ghosts and werewolves, which they no longer reinforce, these are things that are constructs that have are modern replacements for previous superstitions. So, for example, flood myths, angry gods replaced by something that's caused by something we can measure with science, like climate change, for example. So hyperstitions are what maintain the cohesion of the state or the stage, the world stage. It gives us the parameters.
Those are great points. And just to add a little bit to that, one note is that it also has to include the polarization. Interestingly, it doesn't have to be that everybody is uniform and has the same religion or perspective on any of this. And I mean, it's been measured and noted just countless times within the political horseshoe and many other examples and media fakery and all of this stuff. But it's so important that the people being controlled are basically having artificial enemies made out of what would potentially otherwise be friends or people that they could actually collaborate with. So it's fascinating that the hyperstitions in all of their various forms have a built-in almost enemy complex or people who want to oppose them or their imagination, even their nightmares. They hold on to in that kind of polarized way. But just fascinating that it doesn't have to be one uniform hell or heaven for the entire population. It's this complete fraction or fractionalized, I can't think of the word, but it's basically dismembered across, but that's part of the division and part of the divide and conquer scenario. But the hyperstitions, I agree, are completely the substrate of what gets people motivated to cling to these abstractions so vehemently.
Sure. Yeah, a really good example is the movie, the Village. They're called the Elders. The Elders lie and tell all the believers in the village that the village is surrounded by monsters in the woods, so you can't leave. And so they're told about this. They have drills. And in the drills, they're locked down in basements, and they hear the monsters banging on the door. And these are analogous to hyper-realistic school shooting drills. The children are in a room, and they hear someone kicking the door, and it's an actor, of course, in the drill. But what they do is they implant really strong emotions attached to the idea of this threat they have to lock down for. Then they have this belief in the monsters. You have drills to reinforce the terror. And then once in a while, the elders will provide evidence. Like, for example, a mutilated animal in the woods. Now we have evidence that there are monsters out there. And the monsters don't exist. These are costumes that the elders wear when they're prancing around in the woods at night. But in the minds of the villagers, monsters are real, and you can never leave. And so their worldview is constrained. It has a very small border. They live in a village, and they never leave because this hyperstition, which is reinforced by community belief and occasional psyops. So when they provide a dismembered, mutilated animal, that's a psychological operation that reinforces the fake thing. No different than a school shooting. Reinforces the existence of the mentally ill mass shooter. So their hyperstitions are used, again, to create parameters, to create borders, to keep people locked in. And that movie expertly, I think, really demonstrates, more than any movie I've seen, in a microcosm, how the world really works.
I completely agree, and I don't want to take away from anybody else's commentary, so I'll just say that to me, that movie is one of the biggest tells out there of just putting it in people's faces. We talked a little bit about this over the AutoHoax Con #1, but the people who design these things seem to like to flaunt these ideas right in people's faces in fiction and fantasy perspective. And if people really looked at that very critically, that is a perfect model of what's happening now.
Yeah, that one deserves a watch party. I like to analyze the characters because the three people who see through it. One is the village idiot, and he finds the monsters amusing. So he doesn't have any fear. So he's immune. He's mind war inoculated because he's not afraid. The other one is the visually impaired. She's blind, so she can't see the propaganda. And if you can't see it, it's harder to build the analogous internal structure. The hyperstitions don't work. So she too is impervious to the mind war. And the other guy, Lucian, played by Joaquin Phoenix, is a critical thinker, lots of intuition, and he doesn't trust authority. And the three of them escape, basically. The three of them inadvertently get through their matrix. And it's because they weren't conformists. But it just kind of shows, like, well, who sees through it and why? And what made you capable, or what caused you to cease believing the elders? The elders represent the media.
Yeah, and even the parents, as I recall watching that movie, which I was exposed to through the IPS and your work, I watched it all the way through, and there was at the end a kind of apology from the parents, like, "Oh, well, we had to do this because the alternative was worse." It's almost like these Malthusian kinds of people who say, "Oh, population is way too big, and we're going to fail by the nature of just reproducing." But it's fascinating that even the controllers were saying, no, this is the lesser of the evils that, and the only path forward that we could make. And a lot like I've heard you talk about this, Tim, on occasion, but I've seen this as well, which is these controllers, and maybe it's even just for their insiders to get them to be motivated, like, oh, this is the best solution for humanity, is to lie to them and make up these silly stories so you can get paid a lot and just go along with the program, and the alternative would be everybody dies. And so in a way, whatever their motivation is, they definitely do try to put themselves in the moral high ground. And even in the movie, they talk about taking that command or that kind of control over other people's free will. People are born into it. They never have any idea, or like you say, those prominent characters, which is interesting how they archetype each of those characters who can see through the matrix. But ultimately, they have this recalcitrance to go to the point of saying, oh, well, we should have informed you from the beginning that we're lying to you so you could eventually be self-reliant or self-aware. And this is something, of course, just a quick note on this, is that the academic systems, everything that we're ever taught, hobble us from even thinking critically about any of this stuff. So as a slave culture, it definitely is left out of the story. And here we are. I mean, I'm one of these people who basically believed everything I was ever taught from a young age, and then eventually started to become aware that the stories were inconsistent and contradictory. And that, to me, as I value or I measure my own self-awareness to whatever degree I've attained, and I assume I have a lot more to learn before it's all said and done, that I very much more appreciate being aware of how this place works and how people are manipulated than being like a cipher character in the Matrix, just eating steak every day with a big smile on my face. But it's interesting how the elite, or the people within that movie, particularly the village, do take on the elite perspective and in a way offer their apology, but saying that we're going to do it because it is the moral high ground, and that's all there is to it. Screw any sense of your self-will or ability to potentially even create something better, because we already figured it out.
Yep, that would be the rationale. The idea that you had superstition to maintain the cohesion of the state was based on their belief that the masses are fickle, full of lawless passion, and they need to be constrained by fear of God. This is an old concept, and in the village they were basically informed that the world out there is so terrible that we want to create a paradise for you. So they took away their free will in exchange for paradise. And it's like, well, would you want to know? I detected something else with the movie where the village are surrounded by bushes with red berries, and they're programmed from when they're young that is the bad color. And if you see that color, go back to the village. So it's kind of like how in the Garden of Eden, you're supposed to avoid the tree of knowledge. Let's say like the apple, like a red pill, the red fruit. You avoid that because if you have that, then you know too much, and you can no longer stay in the garden. You're no longer welcome. You're like the gods, is what they say. So in the village, they go past the red, and they find out they're in the 20th century. So now they're like the gods. They're equal to the elders, and they can no longer stay unless they want to serve the system. And so at the end, yeah, they're given a breakdown that we had to control everybody to create a perfect world because the world out there is so terrible, and you can no longer stay here since you know how it works. And they're basically given a deal, exit or become part of it and wear a monster costume and become a terrorist. So it's like Stockholm syndrome or something here, but whatever it is, there is some kind of aspect to it where they give themselves the license to be the monsters and the terrorists in order to protect the people inside. And it's rooted though in misanthropy. To bring that comment back, you mentioned misanthropy. The idea that we're so terrible that we need to be shackled to a false worldview and we need to be terrorized by superstitions. That idea is not new. And I think it's rooted in this concept that man is just a terrible, unruly creature that can't be told the truth. And I dispute that, at least for myself personally. I don't know if it's true regarding the masses. Maybe this is a benevolent dictatorship. I'm open to that idea.
Yeah, my quick thought, and maybe this is just totally my reflection of my perception, that I don't give them any credit. Now, maybe that's true, and I do see that possibility. So I'm not discounting it or eliminating it for the potential real or motivation of why this whole thing plays out the way it is today. But in my core interpretation so far, and I'm willing to update this sense of, or my model of reality, but it just does boil down to me in the most fundamental way of slave masters versus slaves. It's no more complex than that. They wield their power at will. It seems to me that this has been going on for a long time and I mean many, many, many generations. And I conjecture about that in that way because it's just such a well-oiled machine that I don't think it needs to be any more complex. But I know what it's like for me to be free and what it's like to pursue that which I do with a clear mind and the ataraxian kind of perspective of not being weighed down by any of their false nightmares and false witness events that they portray. And so I'm way more creative. I'm way more active. I sleep better at night. And here, I think even participating in this forum is an example of what fruit is born from that perspective. So, and I one quick note on this: if I were to measure, the potential of this being a beneficial dictatorship, that it's not served me in any way that's beneficial for me. And maybe I'm the outlier, like I would be the one, and many people here might put themselves in this category, but my freedom somehow creates the dissonance or terror that they're trying to protect against. And I think that on a logical framework falls apart because speaking from a place of let's say self-design morality, one that I would hope other people would accept as good, is something that is my internal ability to be a part of this social realm. So it would be, to me, a lost opportunity or a complete denial of that which I freely designed for myself and or freely collectively collaborate with others, that a Malthusian controller, a beneficial dictator would otherwise delete me, as they've done figuratively and actually, within the social media continuum, as I know the IPS has suffered so many times. So just the rounding out of that thought is that it seems abhorrent to me that there's some good that can come out of this kind of control. That's my initial reaction, but I also measure my reaction with the fact that when I'm disconnected from any of their madness, my life is so much better, and that which I have the opportunity to discuss or create with others is infinitely better than it would have been otherwise.
Can I ask you a question? Do you think that the majority of the population are followers? And so, therefore, the elite, so to speak, have to do something to keep them in check, so to speak?
If you're asking me that, Linda, my quick answer is that's a great question. And I have given this a lot of thought. I'd love to hear the rest of the panel's thoughts on this too. But my reaction is that if for instance, they just shut down the PSYOP entertainment complex today, what would that world be like? And because of the amount of time I've spent measuring people's perspective and the fact that they do not think for themselves, and as adults, many from young adulthood through the end of their lives have never thought for themselves on a fundamental level. And I can't help but think, and this is just a thought game, I'm not projecting that I would ever participate in something like this, but it just so happens that I've measured that the IPS, Tim's work, is so accurate in its reflection or this modeling of how this social control environment works, that it takes a certain level of self-awareness to really see these wheels turning. And getting back to the thing I was just going to suggest, is that we have the power, literally. This might be the thing that the controllers are most fearful of. It's not that we understand how it works. It's that we could literally hijack their system and do it better than them. And basically funnel these majority of people, as you referenced, in any direction we want. Now, that's, of course, not a part of my direction or will. I have no interest or time in any of that. But just to go to your point, and I'd love to hear other people's perspective on this, that the majority is indeed hobbled. Like I mentioned before, they've been mentally handicapped in such a severe way that I would not trust just turning off the PSYOP lights and see what happens over. I'd rather have that. I'd like to see that experiment play out. I'd rather have that than the daily terror. But at the same time, I think, and this is why this work with the IPS is so important, that the philosophic foundation, I think, has to precede any sense of real freedom or celebration of freedom. So if we did unleash those chains, I think it would be interesting to see what happened, but I would have no faith that majority could figure anything out really quickly. I think it would take an effort like this and a very conscious will to try to design something adequate that, people could graduate from being an ignorant being to be one that's self-directing. But I think to me, they're capable of it. It's just a matter of how you go about trying to educate people about how powerful their own will and action is, and something that they can fill in the void of their imagination with the real. I think that takes as much teaching as it taught them to become disconnected from reality, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, I have my own opinions about all this stuff, but I mean, me as a young child, I asked questions and I didn't get the satisfactory answers that I wanted, right? So I kept asking. And when I was denied answers, it was frustrating. I don't think a lot of these people ask questions. That's what I'm saying. They don't ask questions. They just submit from the beginning, if that makes sense. And so therefore they don't have the honest questions to lead them in the right direction.
I agree, and that's partially what I was leaning towards when I was thinking or trying to convey the idea of people who, let's just say you could turn the lights out of the PSYOP entertainment complex. What would be the first thought in their mind? And this is where that handicapped aspect comes into play. No, I don't think people really have mastered this, what I would find to be a natural potential, which has been artificially reduced to nothing, more or less. that they would need. And this is just a guess. This is just a total projection. But based on the fact that nobody does it right now anyway, I would say that that people are not taught, or they're not given the tools to understand how they were manipulated. So if you just stop the information flow, they would still be left without that skill being developed. They would be like babies, basically. That's how I would see it. Now, babies can be taught how to, understand the world, but these babies are in adult bodies who really have no skill or ability to navigate the real, or celebrate it the way that I think we are, or at least the realm of skeptics would, when really trying to divine the real out of, say, fiction. But I agree with you. I've had the same experience, Linda.
Well, I mean, the only reason that I'm bringing this up is because I was raised in a situation. My mother was basically a narcissist, right? That I never got to ask the questions, even though I had them in my head, right? I had the questions, and nobody would answer my questions. And I was punished sometimes for asking the questions. And she was very religious, which I did not agree with. I thought that was all bullshit, even from a young age. So how did I overcome all of that when the masses of the people can't overcome that? And they had better lives than me, probably. The majority. So, yeah, I'm thinking this place may be balanced in a way that is unknown to us at this point, so to speak.
You both raise a really great point here about how immersed we are. It's the sea of irrelevance thing, where there's so much information that you can shout the truth out, and it doesn't matter because people don't have the right context to understand it. You can say something point blank that is 100% true. Let's say, for example, nobody landed on the moon, and it doesn't enter into their worldview because that's not an acknowledged perspective. They're not able to assimilate it, but even if they did, it's like, well, what does this mean? Like with the flat Earth topic, people are like, well, if it is flat, what does it even mean? They can't go the next step on their own. They're asking you to tell them. And I saw that as an indication that these are people who get their information in a passive way. So mainstream media has passive consumers. Alt media has passive consumers of alt media. The difference between passive media consumption and criticism and skepticism is we are active consumers. We are parsing the information first, so that at the end of this, what it means is that passive consumers cannot reframe their worldview, and they can't add anything in that doesn't come from a source. They're not the arbiters of what they believe. They're mind controlled. They are delegating a part of their perception to an external authority, and that's not the truther. Because the truthers are designated as, the enemies of the state. So shouting the truth out doesn't work on those who aren't to understand it and put it in the right context. But the best we can do, I think, and this is what AutoHoax Con is for, is we provide a new model. You have to start with the model. It's like we're looking at a worldview monopoly, and when you see the model, then you can separate your own perceptions from it. But if you're in the model, if you're on the wrong side of the screen and you're taking the screen literally, no amount of truth is going to make a difference. It's going to not stick. And we've all experienced this. Anybody who's ever delved into conspiracy theory or trutherism has experienced this bizarre, it's almost like you're witnessing mind control in action. It's almost unsettling when you say something to somebody that makes perfect sense to you. It's a realization you've had, and you get a blank stare, or they change the subject to something completely mundane. Like it doesn't stick. It doesn't stick because they're in the model. It's like they're dreaming. They're inebriated. My point here is elucidate the model. Expose that there's a map. And once they can see the map, then you can show them, or you can draw some some meaning out of the fact that the map doesn't match the territory. But one of the biggest accomplishments of the PSYOP entertainment complex is in convincing people that the worldview they're given is an accurate model of the world, when it's really a model based on omission, infused with hyperstitions, and it's completely censored and curated.
I agree with that entirely, and I've heard you talk about it previously, Tim, and this is certainly something that I've come into a sense of realization about, that until people have this philosophic connection or understanding or this elucidation of the model, as you just so aptly put, then they don't have the tools they need to navigate the world of information. And by disseminating this kind of model or logical framework of analysis, then it gives people a real concrete tool to test. They don't have to even look at AutoHoax Con and go, okay, well, this is the truth, or this is how I should think, or this is how I should interact with the world of information and make real world decisions. It boils down to having the ability to be presented with this rock solid methodology and examples of it in whatever people present or share, and then go test it. And that's the beautiful thing about what I see out of the effort of this collective, which I think is the best on earth, is this think tank, is that the model and methodology can be logically subsumed. It makes sense, but even more so, it can be applied. And once it's applied, the fruit can be born from that. And of course, people may reject it anyway because they're not ready maybe for reality yet. But this is the first step. I completely 100% agree. And the reason I say that is because I know too many people in my real life that would not even begin to make their first decisions on anything that they personally desire to see or anything they personally invent, which I think many people do that I've talked to. They have fantasies of making the world better. But like you were saying earlier, it's this programming from the external. They're too programmed into that way of thinking that they have yet to really turn on the inside and trust their intuition and whatever it is they personally design or develop, and have faith that that is something worth pursuit. But anyway, the AutoHoax Con type of communication is a great foundation block, a cornerstone, using the Mason's terminology, for anything that follows. It has to be at the very foundation of the building.
Yes, the stage. And I think the world stage is such an apt metaphor because we can describe it as the world stage is the place where the worldview monopolists focus their lens. Their camera is focused at the stage. And you can take an off-world stage perspective, which means you get off of it and you recognize it as such. But until you take the off-world stage perspective and reject the authority of the screen, you are on the stage and in the model. So you're a simulation dweller. And this is why I've been saying lately that simulation theory is a psyop. Simulation theory is a false mysticism designed to lead people who see the discrepancies into thinking everything's fake, instead of seeing the discrepancies as indication that we're being lied to. So it's kind of like a almost a contingency plan. If anybody sees through this and they think it's all BS, they're just going to think that the universe is BS. The universe is glitchy, like the Mandela effect. The Mandela effect did believe that reality itself is no longer objective, no longer follows rules, and it's always changey. That's not a move towards truth. And the Mandela effect, or the Mandela affected, will never try to reverse engineer that. They will stick within their paradigm, and they're kind of like it's a dead end. And the Mandela effect is essentially what you would call the misinformation effect. It's a form of manipulating recollections. But I would point out too that the mainstream media uses the exact same methodology that creates the perception of, quote, Mandela effects every day, but it's actually called the misinformation effect. So another side effect of being constantly inundated with so much media and fake news is that it does influence our perceptions of the world. It does influence our recollections in subtle ways. And so the key thing again is to step away from the stage and take the off-world stage perspective. And we can use truth or orthodoxies and other indicators to show that somebody's not off the world stage. Like if you're still running around terrified of Bill Gates, you're on the stage. He's one of their characters. And the more we make this distinction, the easier it will be for people to let go of the stage and to actually get off of it. Like, hey, you're not fighting Bill Gates. You're not fighting Venezuelan gang members. Kamala Harris is not going to take you to a FEMA camp. You have to disconnect all these narrative threads. And when you do, you step off the stage. And from our perspective, we're looking at the scripting. And that takes us into the realm of being not only off the stage, but insiders, how it all works. And I think this is the approach that's going to work. We're giving truth and facts, but putting it in a context where it makes sense. The raft above the sea of irrelevance. Everybody in the sea of irrelevance, especially truthers, yeah, they're inundated with truth. But it's like signal to noise ratio is so bad. For every fact they get, it's drowned out by 90 mistruths or deep fakes. So they're lost at sea. And what we offer here, I think, is a clear perspective. And it's fundamentally a paradigm shift to go from being a believer to a knower. So what we're doing here is not ideological as much as it's a philosophical change. Rejecting belief in exchange for an operating system and a methodology.
Well said.
I was thinking about the idea of low information versus high information belief, and also how maybe a challenge, maybe how did I get this far, right? How did I personally get out of the village, so to speak? Um, get past the false dichotomy of the yellow safe color, red bad color, and all that. It's a great movie, by the way. Um, but it, a few experiences, I thought like when I was younger, I experienced like censorship from authority figures, um, and that changed the direction of my life a little bit. Um, and also like this idea that I carry personally, that I challenge people like how do you value belief? When you say you believe something, like, do you respect that belief? And how do you have integrity to your belief system? Like how we say, you know, if you can't tell me why you believe it, what does it matter? You know, like you're not self-aware enough to understand the system of determining whether you believe something or not. Like you haven't gone through that yet to like, codify it more or less. Um, and so like some people could like how these truthers or whatnot, they'll call out the space fakery, but it's like meaningless to them because they don't value, like they'll believe, okay, yeah, NASA's faking space. They believe the fakeability, but they don't have any context to put that in, so it just becomes another irrelevant infographic. And fundamentally it's still this like oppressive new world order, and they're not like applying the model, and so that's where it's demonstrated their lack of the full model of skepticism, and it's the reason why they're not motivated to develop a model is because they don't value their belief. They don't value their choice to believe or not. And so like, and especially like if you're a religious person, like if you subscribe to any one particular religion, like it reminds me of that example of like how like and especially with the reputation of Islam. And then they shut down. They're like, oh, we're not going to walk around the giant black cube this year because, Rona. Um, and so, like, how much do they believe in Allah? How much do they value their belief in the Muhammad and the Quran to like behave that way? Or like the chemtrailers who don't wear masks or in vape and all this stuff. And so that's the challenge. And if like you take on that challenge, that's could potentially guide you to this think tank or some creating your own similar think tank of a parallel type media. I don't know, just my thoughts.
Yeah, all very good. Very good points. And I think one of the things that we're doing here, it's almost a marketing tactic where we distinguish parallel media as a third branch of media. You got main and alt, and now you have this third branch, and we define ourselves as having a culture of disbelief. We are non-believers. And by making the statement, I'm a non-believer, a believer is going to have to be challenged. Well, am I a believer? I can point out, well, yeah, you believe this and this. Why? So we can start attacking their beliefs, undermining their faith, which is what we have to do. I think we have to approach this as though we were a group of atheists in a theocratic society, and we want to overthrow it. We want to change the paradigm. And even though I'm not advocating literal atheism, I'm saying that we have to disbelieve in their God constructs, their creation myths, and depose their priesthood and reject all of their false teachings. And that's kind of what we're doing here. So in a way, this is a neo-enlightenment. It's a reframing of worldview itself. And I think it can take off. I'm not sure what the long-term effects are, but I do think that as from a marketing perspective, the more people who fill in parallel media, the bigger its internal economy gets, the more noise it makes. The more people who are on the fence or didn't know they were on the fence will join us. Like we can see exponential growth in what is tantamount to a new philosophical movement that is outside of the controlled paradigm. There's nothing that can stop it. I mean, we have little annoyances like their attempts to ban and censor. But becoming a separate media ecosystem means that censorship is going to be a thing of the past when it comes to what we're doing. We don't need to breathe their air. And so the unacknowledged, the off-world stage perspective is going to go ahead and grow off to the sides while they try to manage their little sheeple. But at some point, this is why I say the crack Gwyn. The raft gets so big, it's like a kraken, where they won't be able to ignore it. And then when it decides to move across the land and, I would say, test the integrity of the world stage infrastructure, things can get fun. Because in my opinion, a committed group of free thinkers who have figured this out can turn into something big enough to cause an interesting reaction. We'll make a splash because my goal is to see what happens. Like, so I don't know, but I think we can test it, and I want to see if we can do $1 billion in damage to mass media infrastructure. As in, it'll cost them a NASA's annual budget to do damage control for what we're unleashing. This is a one-way thing. The instant you flip that switch, you've stepped outside of the screen, you recognize the metascript and how we've all been gamed, you're not going to fall right back into it. If you leave a religious cult and you understand it and you've separated from it intellectually and emotionally, you're not going to fall for future cults. So this is mind war inoculation. I don't think it's been done at this scale or at the scale that I think we can blow it up to. Right now it's sort of small, but it's notable that we're the only ones doing this. I look forward to see what happens in the future, and I want to say thanks to everyone here, by the way, for listening, commenting, and adding to the conversation. I think it's just going to get more interesting as we go along.
Indeed, and now I can't help but think when that $1 billion damage comes around, that is it even possible for NASA CGI to get any worse? And that'll be a lot of fun to watch it go further down the tubes.
I think it's there's a kind of an inside joke here with the whole insider concept, because we're borrowing from the slogan from Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, which means ignite. And he's the one who's credited with saying, go forth and set the world on fire. And I think what we're doing is we're building up to a point where we're going to go forth and set the world stage on fire. Where we set so many fires. This is like out of the art of war, where you set a fire, and while they're distracted putting that one out, you go attack something else. And I could see a multi-pronged campaign that is ceaseless, decentralized, and unstoppable. There'll be so many fires they won't be able to put it out. And I think it's going to be fun, which is a hugely important aspect of it. You know, counterculture should be fun, or especially if you're doing so, with the right intentions and for the right reasons. But the contrived, controlled opposition is not only not fun, you're a miserable propaganda mule full of toxic mind viruses if you go with the establishment-friendly counter. So I'm looking very much forward to the future here, and I don't think $1 billion is too much to aim for. When I say $1 billion in damage, I mean it's going to cost a lot of money and a lot of opposition think tanks to come up with ideas on how to counter what we're doing. And we've seen indications of it. I think when Elon Musk agreed that space looks like CGI, it's not a concession. That was an attack. That was them trying to co-opt one of our best observations and twist it. They're trying to gaslight it. So I think we're making progress already, because I do see indications that there's pushback against people who see.
Um, sorry. Okay, I'm going to make this quick. Elon, he should know this. I bet he watches the stream or has people. Anyway, it's a rule from a place that some people go to. It says you can't end before your own post, and what that means is, like, if you're gonna say something, and then while you're saying that, you already know what someone's gonna criticize, and then you counter that criticism, like, or like, what the first, because N before is what someone posts as a reply. And so if you, because you didn't give a chance, because like you someone would make a post and they say, look, NASA put a satellite in space, and then the very first response to that post is going to be fake and gay. And so what Elon did is he, like, look, I put a satellite in space in before fake and gay, and you can't actually do that. Just a formality that Elon should know. Anyway, I'm gonna stop talking.
In V4, yeah, great point. He wants to co-opt anybody who's going to state the obvious, and then he makes it a point for his side. So I agree with all my skeptics. It looks fake, but it's real. I mean, I think it's brilliant because he's pulled this off. He's done it twice, and now everybody can say it's fake, and we agree with the guy who's faking it, but it's real. It's just like, it's clever. It shouldn't be effective, but it is. And of course, he has ownership of this massive platform, which is reality control in a large way. And I think it's pretty, from an anthropologist perspective, it's interesting to look at these big psyops that follow a big event, like this hurricane thing. Look at how many people were just pulled into this alternate reality game where, oh, look, the Haitians are eating cats, and Bill Gates is controlling the weather, and Venezuelan gangs are taking over apartments, and children are being transported in big carriers, and the union workers are trying to free the children. That's a very interesting and complex and scary world that they all got dragged into, the power of doom scrolling on X. And this is by design. Because if the space program is about controlling the inner space, the space between your ears, Elon Musk is one of the top space program figureheads. It makes perfect sense that he's right there on top of mass mind control. Same thing with Bezos, Amazon. Amazon does have some creative, or rather some curation power, some censorship power, maybe not directly. He's not there anymore, but the connection between the space program and mass mind control, something to emphasize, because that's what the point of the space program is. It's not to take you to Mars. It's to convince you that the way that we would live on Mars is ideal. Let's live on Earth as we would on Mars. And people are buying it. So.
And I agree with the idea, or the reality, actually. It's not just an idea or ideal, but the fact of the matter is, from my experience, that so-called quote-unquote waking up to the real world has been one of the greatest joys of my life. And I think, interestingly, and I'll leave this for maybe further in-depth contemplation on another conversation, but it is fascinating to consider what ops, and I don't want to give them any ideas, of course, but what lengths they would have to go to counter a movement that's about reality. And as far as this group is communicated, some kind of benign morality. I don't see anybody kind of putting any kind of scrolls in front of me to follow any directives or whatever Moseian kinds of laws there would be. But this has been and is continuing to be a ton of fun. And just living in reality itself is something that can be enjoyed. I know there's all kinds of things that can happen. I've experienced all kinds of ups and downs in my life, but the approach that they would have to take to deny people who actually are accurately expressing reality through their words and actions and presentations, first of all, that's undeniable. But the other part is that it is benign and it is really fun. So how they demonize that, I'll leave it to them to figure that out. But certainly they've got creative minds capable of coming up with something, but it just feels like it's always going to fall short.
Yeah, exactly. They're armed and ready to go against the alternative believers. They have nothing to say to the non-believers. They can't grasp it because we're outside of their purview. We're easily able to co-opt the space skeptics, the NASA critics, the flat Earth group. I mean, there's 11 million, quote, flat earthers in Brazil. The numbers are huge, and this just means these are millions of people who question the dominant paradigm and the source, and they become skeptical about media. And they were able to co-opt that and run it into the ground, stop it from becoming a movement of any kind. It wasn't able to accomplish very much. It's just, at this point, it's pretty clear that they sabotaged it because they saw its power. But they had people in place. It was like a limited hangout. What we're doing, however, doesn't have any representation on the world stage. There isn't any foothold where they can just jump in and say, yeah, we're AutoHoaxers and we want to do these bad terrorist things. Like, they can't just broad brush us. And so we're outside of their purview, we're above their pay grade, outside their area of expertise. So we're just going to quietly amass and grow and grow. And as a movement, it has an intellectual high ground. It's an operating system, not an alt belief system. We have a moral high ground. Not to mention, I think also a moral imperative to push back against lifetimes of programming. But that's going to happen when we have the numbers. 10,000 auto-hoaxers set loose in a targeted way will be unstoppable. There's no guardrail, there's no influencer, and there's no conspiracy that we can't go after with a concentrated focus and do immense irreparable damage to. We can discredit people. We can destroy controlled opposition documentaries. We can blow up narratives when we have the numbers. The numbers are everything. That's just that's a big part of how this place works. But if you can imagine a top tier influencer on the far right, let's say a Tim Pool, he would never talk to us. He would never acknowledge the validity of our perspectives. Well, someone like that, confronted with thousands of people, maybe many of them members, they will find it impossible to avoid us. And at some point, they're going to have to acknowledge the auto-hoaxers. And by the time the auto-hoaxer is recognized as a being, it'll be too late. We will already have established ourselves through multiple conventions, publications, think tanks, which will splinter into additional think tanks. And additionally, we're going to have a nice documentary at some point, the auto hoaxer, so that when this goes viral, we define it, we control it, and they won't know how to react. I think this is going to be funner than when the flat Earth meme went viral. And we made it go viral. It came out of the IPS. We did it with billboards, we did it with events and conferences, and then it was slowly co-opted by more establishment-friendly conspiracy theorists with deep connections.
Yeah, agreed with the plan. That sounds fantastic. Perfectly modeled and indeed just a super ton of fun about to be had and being had.
I'm going to leave this open, by the way. I'm not going to shut down this Discord, but I'm going to let Craigbot go. He's the one who does the recording. So this is going to, at this point, officially conclude episode 2 of the IPS Deep Think Tank series. I do 2 of these a week at a minimum. And these will be put through all the usual channels. But this is number 2. I want to say thanks everyone here for your comments and participation and for listening. And there will be more to come. And of course, you'll get this in your archives, and it'll be put out there on a premiere here soon as well. Welcome to the IPS Deep Think Tank.